Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Honor the Feminine podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Ledford, and today I have the amazing Simone Wright with us, and I'm really excited. I mean, she came to play, so it's going to be fun. So as you know, we start each episode with an image and story from my travels, because when I was traveling is where I really started to hear my intuition again. I know she was always there, but the chaos of the day-to-day and the stresses had really muffled her voice, and so I'd stopped hearing her. So as I was traveling, I started to hear her whispers again. So today, the image is called Face in a Tree, and it was taken in Ocean, India. There is an intricately carved Jain temple in the bleak deserts of Rajasthan in the small town of Ocean. While the beautifully designed sandstone of the temple was carved by man, this tree right outside was intricately carved by Mother Nature. In a moment of pause, I recognized the glowing face out of the bark. This is such a gorgeous reminder of how slowing down and not glossing over the surface creates surprises in places we may not expect them. As we cultivate the practice of pausing, the magic of our world becomes more evident. And this is the image that reminds me of our guest today, Simone Wright. Simone, welcome.
Thanks for having me back, Shannon. It's such a treat. Such a treat.
Some of you may remember Simone was with us during she's part of the Women with a Vision retreat. And so when we did that episode, we got to spend a short time together, but it wasn't enough. She likes to play too much, so I invited her back.
Yes, that's me. Intuitive, spiritual goofball. That's me for sure.
I love it. So Simone, share yourself with us today. Tell us about you.
Well, I think I would call myself a Renaissance woman, to be honest with you, Shannon. I'm an author and an artist and a intuitive coach and esoteric philosopher and metaphysical teacher and chief cook and bottle washer of two of my own companies. And when I have some time, I teach intuition on the side. I just want to fill up life with as much as I can. So I do a little bit of everything, all of it with an alignment towards greater spiritual power and spiritual clarity and being able to connect with our true innate wisdom and to be able to use what life throws at us at any given day to, whether it's mundane or miraculous, to find the wisdom in it. And to find the joy in it, even if it's uncomfortable. And that's really sort of my mission, has been to teach people how to really listen to kind of what you were talking about in the opening there, of really listening to that inner voice that is so patiently yet urgently waiting for us to just wake up, like snap out of it, like in the movie Moonstruck, where Cher bonks Nicolas Cage over the side of the head and just says, snap out of it. It's like, I'm here. And being able to reconnect with that deep, profound friendship is sort of what juices me every day.
And you said something so beautiful, because you talked about being aligned. And I love the way you talked about, because you talked about really being aligned with a purpose, where the actions that get woven together with that, whether you're teaching intuition or painting or all of these beautiful things that you do, it all comes from this aligned, purposeful place.
Yeah. And I've been, that's something I've been contemplating a lot lately, Shannon, because there's a lot, I hear a lot of people out there talking about and questioning, what's my purpose? Am I here to save the world? Are we doomed? Do I have to be putting myself out there in a really big way and, having big stages and huge client lists? And I've seen a lot of people really sort of spinning their wheels a little bit about this grand, huge purpose, and that they're put here to save the world in some big, profound way. And what I'm realizing, even through my own work as an artist and as a teacher and as a spiritual adventurer myself, is that I'm realizing more and more, even though I touch people and teach people and all that other stuff, I'm realizing that more my purpose is being able to discover my innate gifts and what those things are, and really just shining the crap out of those things for myself, and really sucking the marrow out of those things for myself. And whatever the overflow of those things that I'm doing for myself is, that kind of like drips out of a honeycomb, like when a bee fills up a comb of honey, it's when it overflows that we get to share it. And so I'm finding that there's a deeper, and maybe it's a spiritual selfishness. I'm not really sure what to call it, because we've been so conditioned in recent years that, we've got to be putting everything out there and putting everything out there and putting everything out there. And I'm finding lately that it's like, what really just juices me? Like, could I spend all day in the studio and paint and not talk to a single soul and that make me happy? Abso-frickin-lutely. Could I talk to Shannon for an hour and not have to talk to anybody else through the course of the day? Would that make me happy? Yes. And is that enough? Yes. And finding that as being my purpose is to just what makes me explode. And if when I explode, it happens to hit people, great. That's kind of where I'm at with purpose right now.
Oh, and I love that. And it ties really beautifully to something I've been talking about recently, in the idea of, as some of the women in my life are talking about, not comparing our work, right? So for me to be like, oh, Simone's work's more important than mine because she helps people, tap into their intuition, right? I realize that in that we do ourselves and everyone else and the world an injustice.
Yes.
That I need to step into my juicy, right?
Yeah.
And overflow from the place that, I connect people with each other. That's part of who I am and what I do. For me to think that's less important than you teaching intuition or the painting, it's crazy.
Yes,
and that's how
it
we
is.
screw ourselves and the world.
Yes. Yes. And that becomes a form of self punishment and self, and self diminishment. And to be able to, if you're a stay-at-home mom, but you love making brownies and you don't have a global platform where you're changing the world, but you make brownies that the children love and your children's friends love, and that your husband walks in and says, "Oh, baby, that's some chocolate stuff. Oh my God," that's enough. That is so enough. That is, we don't need to be more than what calls our heart, to think we're not being enough or doing enough or creating enough to save the world. Because, I went to an event the other day with he's a mystical beekeeper. Ooh. He raises bees and he makes potions and elixirs and wine, bee wine, and all of these wonderful, beautiful things. And he loves his bees. And he's got a couple, he's got maybe 60 hives, and that's what he does. And he's not trying to save the world. He's trying to care for his bees and love his bees the best way he knows how. And out of that caring for his little corner of the world, these elixirs come forward and this magic comes forward. And through his joy of that, he travels around the country and he shares it. But his mission isn't to change the world. His mission is to care for the bees and do the things that bring him joy. And that just oozes all over the people that he influences or that he meets or that he bumps into, like the pollen on the pollen. And it really struck me because he's not trying to change the world. He's changing and loving his corner of it in such a profound way that it's touching me. And now I was so inspired by it and I'm sharing it with you. And now everybody who listens to you is sharing it. But his focus wasn't the world. His focus was his little group of bees. And yet now it's gone global because of what I just said.
Yeah. And there is that ripple effect, right? But that only becomes a ripple effect because of how deeply you can feel his love for all of that. Because otherwise it doesn't really touch you, and you don't share that with me here.
No. And so, but we can bring that bee love into whatever it is we do, whether it's baking brownies or having a global podcast or painting paintings or teaching or driving carpool. It's that intimate love affair with what we're doing in any given moment that is going to spread out and have an effect. And to compare our duty to anybody else's spiritual duty is so silly and reckless, really. So, even if you're a maid, a housekeeper, and you just dedicate your life to scrubbing sinks and toilets, but you bring your particular passion for that to it, then that's world changing, So.
Yeah, and I think it's helped me deepen into that idea of dharma, because when you're talking about duty, it has that dharma to it, and I hadn't thought about it quite like that, but that I now more deeply understand what that feels like. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of like, when any of us, particularly those of us who are on a spiritual path, or a conscious path, if we don't like the label spirit, that we think that we've got to be doing big grand gestures in order to make an impact and, to save the world and change the world. And oh my gosh, she's coming off the rails. And if I don't fix her, we're doomed. And, I'm realizing more and more that it's less of those grand gestures, and it's so much more of the small ones. When a diamond cutter cuts a diamond, he has to cut 1,000 tiny little facets into that single stone to make the light shine. And it's a bunch of little facets that carry the light. It's not the big facet at the top of the diamond. It's all the little bitty ones on the side that make that thing shine. And if we just are responsible and for our little facet, no matter how tiny it is, whether it's teaching intuition or running podcasts or raising children, it lifts the pressure off of us to think we've got to be some big, huge savior of the world. And if we can just buff our little facet into a way that pleases us, then the light will shine meaningfully through that. And then it becomes a collective that has value, like that diamond. Very profound.
Well, you know what I'm thinking like, oh, this is such good medicine for me, because there are times when the grand gesture becomes my focus, right? And I'm better about it now, but that's just such a beautiful medicine for me. And even in my day-to-day, right, to just take whatever I'm doing in a given moment, whether it's playing with my daughter or, doing a podcast interview or whatever it is, to just step in with that and just buff that little piece of myself in that time and don't worry about the others so much in that moment.
No. Yeah. Because to use the diamond analogy or even the bee analogy, there is a wholeness, all of the bees. This is what I learned at the conversation with the bee guy this weekend, that all of the bees are serving the hive, but the hive itself, the culture itself the hive itself is a singular being, and all of the little bees are facets. And a diamond, a beautiful, stunning diamond, is a singular thing, and all of those little facets, they contribute to the whole. The whole is using all the little facets. And so it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both and I think what a lot of us, or all and I think, what a lot of us tend to do, even in our spiritual work, is we think it's got to be one or the other. It's got to be global saving, or am I saving myself, right? Like, can I save the world and still be self-serving? And I think the answer to that is abso-frickin-lutely you can save the world and be self-serving. I think it's necessary. It's essential.
It may even be that in being self-serving, you may be saving the world. Absolutely.
They don't need to be separate. And I know that, I learned that a lot as an artist and as a painter, that if I don't paint, and I mean, granted, I have collectors and people pay me well for my art, and that's wonderful. But if I don't paint for myself, if I don't use it as an outlet to connect to spirit, to connect to my creativity, if I'm not doing it for me, then something dies. And I feel it and I see it and I sense it in the work that, if I'm only doing it for the paycheck, not even doing it for the client, but if I'm not doing it for me, and what I get out of it and how it serves me and what the communication is with my intuition through that creative process, then the rest of my life suffers. And, my intuition teaching suffers. And so I think we're being invited to, I think we need to call some of our giving that we so generously and abundantly project there out into the world and call some of it home. Because it's kind of like the image of the tree that you opened this conversation with, that, the roots have to go deep on that tree in order for the leaves to grow and the fruit to be sprouted. And the tree puts his roots down long before he ever produces or she produces any fruit. And that's a very self-serving action on the part of that tree. I'm going to stretch these puppies out as far as I can get them, and I'm going to break, concrete to do it, and I'm going to strangle other trees to do it, and I'm going to. So I think we're being called to, as we're stepping into this greater desire to change things in the world, that I think we've got to call some of that giving home.
Can you talk to us a little bit about cultivating intuition and that we all have it?
Yeah. Well, we all have it. Absolutely. We're born with it. And it's our first intelligence. And as you've been reading my book, so first intelligence.
Yeah, and I will say about the book, I just want to comment that, like, the book to me is a remembering. And we were talking about that before we started recording. Like, there's a remembering that's going on for me as I've stepped into the book. So,
yes, it is learning to remember our first intelligence is, I think, if we're asking ourselves, how can I serve the world, or how can I make the world a better place? Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe that's the best place for us to start, because if we have access to that wisdom, and we do it by getting quiet and generating a field of coherence and turning off our technology and sitting under a tree, or going and hanging out with bees, or playing with our children, or painting a picture, or digging in the garden, where our mind is still and open and flexible. We cultivate our intuition by doing things that bring us joy, that cultivate, nourish peace. And by asking ourselves, if I didn't have to do anything today, what would I really want to do with my time? And then whatever pops into our head, that's intuitive nudging saying, go do that. Even if you make no money, and even if it doesn't change the world, and even if it doesn't affect anybody's life, go play with that. Even if it's going to play marbles, or, it doesn't need to be a big, grand, huge gesture. And if we can start in those small ways by asking just those little questions, like, what would bring me joy right now? Even if it's a bar of chocolate, go get it. And when you start to listen to those little nudges, then your intuition says, she's listening to us. And so if we can get her attention in these little bitty ways, go play marbles, go get a bar of chocolate, what's going to bring me joy right now, then when the big rubber hit the road questions pop up, we will have trained her to listen to us. And so when it is those big earth-shattering questions, is this a job I should stay in, or where should I turn next, or is it time for me to move, or how can I transform and heal my marriage? Those big questions, when those emerge, we've gotten so used to listening to the little tender voice that plays with us that when the big answers are needed, we know it in a minute because we've played with it so much that it's just normal. I think what a lot of people tend to do when they're developing their intuition is they've got their back up against a wall. They're in a corner, and it's kind of like make or break time. And they don't know the answers. And so they're like, oh my gosh, I either need to go to a psychic or a shrink, or I need to take an intuition class. And so there's a desperation. And I always say, start practicing with your intuition when there's no pressure. No
you're
pressure.
Starting to trust it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
When it doesn't matter so much, you can, trust it and see what happens, and trust it and see what happens.
Yes. And so you start to learn then how that intuition feels to you and how it speaks to you, and the tone it uses, and whether you feel it on the left side of your body or the right side of your body, or you feel it in your butt or your head. It's like, oh, I see how this feels. And so, when you're turning to your intuition, when it's crunch time and you haven't practiced in advance, it's very hard to trust. And then you're even more scrambled because you're like, I don't know if this is really my intuition or my wishful thinking, or if I'm making this stuff up and it's just a bunch of horse hooey.
Or my ego's getting involved in some way that muffles my intuition.
Yeah. And so I say how do we start to cultivate it? By doing stuff that's a lot of fun. In your car, left or right, what's going to get me home quicker? Are you going to burst into flames if you get it wrong? No. So you play that way. In the line at the grocery store, all right, which line's going to go faster? Which way? Feel it, left. Okay. And see what happens. Is the world going to tip off its axis if you're wrong? No. But, so to have those kind of experiences in the grocery store, which food would be more beneficial for whatever it is I'm trying to work in my health today? Mangoes or bananas? Feel it, sense it, bring it home, and have those kind of experiences where it's fun. Even kind of what color can I paint in my wall that will bring me greater sense of courage or well-being? And then you go to Home Depot and you stand in front of that paint chip aisle, and you're like, what color? Show me. And then you wait and you look and you feel and you pick that thing up, and then you go buy the paint and you paint your wall and you feel it. Is your house going to fall off its hinges? No. But you practiced. And then when the deals get bigger and the questions get larger, you've had some time to play.
Oh my God, I love this so much. And so it sounds like, as we step into that question about how do you honor the feminine and stay in touch with your intuition, you've played so much with her that you have an ongoing deep relationship.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, it was a deeply profound natural skill for me as a kid. It was really, air quotes here, gifted intuitively as a child. But what I know is that I was also an artist since I was a child. I was playing with animals. I was out in the dirt. I was painting. I was drawing. I was coloring. I was doing stuff that nobody, my teachers were like, she doesn't listen in class. She's hard to teach. And I'd be like, playing, which of course didn't please my teachers or my parents when the report cards would come home. But anyway, but
not valued in the system.
Not valued in the system, not one iota. But so yes, there's been a lot of playing. And what that playing has then afforded me to do is then to take my intuitive skills into places like law enforcement and use it to help find missing children, use it to help solve homicide cases, use it to help me develop my own entrepreneurial career, whether it's my writing or my teaching or my artistry, to use it then in those on those stages and in those platforms where it is a little bit more of a make or break deal, where it is more crucial, and when sometimes it's life on the line. But it's like anything, when you're learning to ride a bicycle, when you're young, you've got training wheels. You know that you're going to be a little wobbly. The training wheels are there to support you. And then one day your dad sneaks those puppies off and you're riding on your bike and you're like, whoa, it just happens. Or driving a car. Or, it just becomes organic. But I never encourage you to, throw yourself off of the cliff in a big way with your intuition when you're learning to trust it in those meaningful ways. And she is always, always, always there. I remember I had a really powerful experience many years ago in the cemetery with my father, who had passed away when I was 7 years old. And I was having a quarter life existential crisis. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and I wasn't using my intuition at all. And my life was in the crapper. And
I've been there.
And I'm sure we all have. We've all been there. And I just stood there in the cemetery screaming at my dad, who'd been, dead for 20 years. And I'm like, why is my life so sideways? Why aren't you talking to me? And I heard it as clear as a bell. He says, I've been here the whole time. You just weren't listening. And in that moment, it was like my head blew off my shoulders. And it's the exact same thing with our intuition. It's been there the whole time. We've just not been listening. And we talk ourselves out of it. And we talk ourselves out of it because, again, we think that it has to be, if our intuition is speaking to us, that it's going to be this big, earth-shattering, global transformational, big, huge message. And some days it's just about cake or chocolate or, what kind of fruit to bring home. And
oh my God.
We need to let ourselves off the hook a little bit about taking it all quite so seriously. That's why
we make it so complicated, my love, and it's not. No. We are what make it complicated. And this is why I say, the more you invite the sense of play, and this is why children are so wildly intuitive. They don't care if they get it wrong. And I always say to people too, invite the sense of play, and then also give yourself permission. Hear me on this, guys. Give yourself permission to screw it up. Give yourself permission to get it wrong. Give yourself permission to get an intuitive nudge, follow it, and it not come to some great, huge lottery winning success, and be like, okay, that's all right. Moving on. And you know what? The more we give ourselves permission and the more we give each other permission, the more permission there is to do it.
Yeah. Yes. As an artist, my greatest successes have come, and the biggest leaps in my career have come when I've made a mistake, where I had something in my head and I thought I wanted it to turn out a certain way, and something in my mind went wrong on the canvas or with the clay. And I look at it afterwards and I go, how did I do that? Because that is insane. That is, wow, that is so cool. And because it was a mistake, I can't recalibrate it in my head and go, what did I do? How do I recreate it? Because that's a screw up. And so it's through those things where you're not thinking so much and you're willing to do something completely batshit crazy, and let yourself, air quotes here, fail, that those biggest leaps in transformation come. And you're never going to know until you've gotten to the other side of it.
Right.
That's the trick. It's like crap.
That is the trick.
Yeah.
Can you, so you and I, before we started, we were talking around comfort zones and intuition and how they play together. So if you could speak to that a little bit, because this fascinates me.
Yes. Well, okay. So so intuition works in two realms of comfort. Okay. It works along the path of least resistance is one. Mm-hmm. And then it works along the path of highest good. So what a lot of people like to do is path of least resistance. I'm going to use my intuition. Everything is going to be easy peasy, light and breezy. I'm going to know it's my intuition because it's just going to feel like I can lean into it and the fairies are dancing on my shoulders and it's going to feel wonderful. Sure. That's half of it. Absolutely. Sometimes it will feel that way. And that has its benefits too. Mm-hmm. But the other side of that intuitive equation is the path of highest good, where intuition will point you into a certain direction that will require you to grow, that will force you out of your comfort zone, that will force you into greater levels of courage, that will force you to let go of limitations, playing small, being unworthy, afraid you're going to piss somebody off or disappoint anybody or be better than somebody else. It is going to ask you to break open every limitation you've got and let every framework of your regular old comfortable life. It's going to say, if you want to do this, kid, you got to shatter those. And when our intuition is guiding us to take certain actions that stretch us and that call us into greater levels of courage, what people will tend to do is they'll say, well, that must not be my intuition because it's really scaring me. And people have told me that if it's my intuition, it's going to feel all warm and fuzzy and fairy dusty. And I say, well, no, that's not the case. It'll use the path of least resistance to get you to a certain point and it'll feel comfortable. And then when there's going to be a really big breakthrough where you're getting ready to upgrade in success or upgrade in wealth or upgrade in health or upgrade in connection, it's going to say grow. And you get to choose then at that moment whether or not you risk the growth or you turn back to saying, well, I just want to follow that path of least resistance because that doesn't scare me quite so much. And when you're able to break through those highest good moments, it's like Chuck Yeager breaking through the sound barrier. You give it all the gas you've got, and it might feel like that jet. And this is the story of Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barriers. His jet just about broke apart, and pilots before him, 5 or 6 of them died because at that moment of breakthrough, they pulled back on the throttle and their jets blew apart. But Chuck Yeager, at that moment of the path of highest good, he said, all right, screw this, boys. Here we go, Houston. I'm giving it all I've got. And he pushed that throttle forward, and that jet broke through that sound barrier. And he got through to this other side of this turbulence, and it was smooth sailing. And so in that moment, then, the path of least resistance pops up again, and there is smooth sailing again until you reach another threshold where your intuition will say, all right, kid, are you ready to ramp it up again? Let's give it some gas. And so it works on both of those trajectories. And if you're going to have these big evolutionary leaps that we're wanting our intuition to guide us towards, we have to be willing to walk both of those paths. The growth won't happen if it's only via the path of least resistance.
Oh my God. That's why I love you so much. I almost have no words because that was just so awesome and such the experience of my life.
Yeah. Well, and that's mastery. That's mastery. And, as we're being called into greater levels, and Shannon and I had talked about this a little bit before, and I'll just give you a brief story. As I've mentioned that I'm an artist, and I'm wanting to bring my art into a more affluent, global, conscious, high-end community. And I was letting my intuition guide me in certain directions, and it had guided me via the path of least resistance along a bit of the way, in that I had found a magazine. In that magazine, there was an article about an architect here in Los Angeles who was designing beautiful homes, and I read about him, and he spoke my language and he used the words I loved. And I said, and he's building these $6 million homes. So my intuition said, send him an email. So I sent him an email, never met him before, linked to my website. So I did that, again, path of least resistance, didn't hear anything back from him. So there was no immediate response. And then I said, well, what do I do? My intuition said, get your ass in the car, drive down to Santa Monica, go introduce yourself to him face to face. Okay, that's the path of highest good. That's stretch. And normally I would never do that. I would be like, well, that's rude. I can't show up without an appointment. He's going to tell me no. Who do I think I am to show up at this celebrity architect's place and say he needs me? Blah, 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 blah. And I just said, screw it. And so I put a package together. I dressed to the nines. I got in my car. I drove to Santa Monica in Los Angeles on a Thursday afternoon, which is insane.
That was like brutal.
I know. And the whole drive, I'm going, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? And it's my intuition is just go, just go, just go. And I got there. He wasn't there yet. I said to his assistants, is Mario here? He said, well, he'll be here in 10 minutes. You're welcome to hang out. So I got a little tour of the office. Mario showed up, the architect. He's like, do we have an appointment? I said, no, but I sent you an email last week, blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, I remember your work. It's beautiful. I just haven't had time to respond. And I said, I really love your work. I'd love for you to consider my work in your piece, your homes. And he said, you know what, this is perfect timing because I'm just finishing a $6 million build. It'll be ready in 4 months. I have a house full of empty wall space. Your paintings would be perfect. Go to the build site and pick the walls you want. So now I've developed this relationship with this architect along those lines of what I wanted and where my intuition was leading me. But it scared the shit out of me to get in my car and drive and go and do something that felt so out of my comfort zone. But my intuition was saying, go do it. And it paid off. And so I broke through a resistance. And now there's going to be some smooth sailing as I develop this relationship with this architect who has access to Architectural Digest magazine, who has access to high-end clients and collectors, who are the people that I want. And so there had to be that breaking through of being scared and uncomfortable, but still following the intuitive guidance and not knowing if it would blow up in my face, but doing it anyway and getting the payoff there.
But the beautiful starting point of all of this wasn't just like, I know Mario has high-end clients. I want to work with him. It was, I felt into the article, he was using the same words as me. This was already really in alignment. It was already touching off the intuition, right? Yes. It wasn't like, oh, I want to work with Brad Pitt, right?
Yes.
Because of this, because he's Brad Pitt or whatever. Right. There was that already that resonance that you felt through your intuition. And I think that's such a beautiful starting point as things start to resonate with us.
Yes. Yeah. And because that language, that common language was there, I could speak a language to the architect that he understood. We both spoke the same language of, he loves the stars and he loves the cosmos and he loves nature, and that's all my stuff. And so what our intuition will do, i.e. the path of least resistance, is it will put us in alignment with the people who speak our language, right? It will use that path of least resistance, and it'll also tap us on the shoulder and make us feel uncomfortable when we're not in alignment, because there were many years in my artwork, even though I was doing what pleased me, that it wasn't in alignment with my soul, and I was paying a certain price for that. There was a level of inauthenticity that was hard to step out of because it paid me so well. Mm-hmm. And when I really sort of stepped to that idea of, if you just really set a powerful intention, although that's not enough, there needs to be a whole other equation around that, and be willing to take some risks and some leaps and trust your intuition, that even though as you're, you feel like you've jumped off a cliff, that if you can maintain the alignment, that eventually either you'll sprout wings or somebody will come along and catch you. Mm-hmm. And so to trust that. And that too is why it's so important to understand your language. What, kind of brings us back to full circle of where we started. What really makes you happy? Is it chocolate? Is it stars? Is it plants? Is it jazz? Is it bees? Is it
Gosh, and we talk about that all the time on the podcast, that if something that you hear here, like pulls at your heartstrings, pulls at your passion, just get curious and move in that direction a little and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are no small passions. There are these, that's why I'm saying it doesn't have to be something that changes the world. There's, I don't know. And if any of you guys have seen the, North Face YouTube videos, it's about young people who are, extreme mountain climbers, extreme, snowboarders, they're free climbers. They climb mountains with no ropes. And they're these youngsters who live in the back of a van, and they come from all over the world, but their passion is being outside in nature, shredding snow, climbing up the faces of rocks with no ropes. Like, they're insane, but they love it like their hair is on fire. And what's so cool about the passion of these young people is that they're making money. They're making a living because North Face, who's a global mountaineering brand, has seen the passion of these youngsters and pays them to go do what they love to do. And so there are no small passions. The resources that those people need to support this passion that makes no sense. Why would you climb in the logical world? Why would you climb a mountain with no ropes? Like, are you insane? And these people are some of the happiest people I've ever seen. And they're physically fit, and they're making money, and they're doing what they love, because they look at this mountain that makes no sense to anybody else, and they say, there are no small passions. That's mine. And then the resources that they want and need had shown up. It's like, more power to you, kid.
On that note, there are no small passions. God, I love this. So, my love, are you ready for the random questions?
Yes. Fire away, kid.
So, if you could sit down with a woman, alive or dead, for a chat and tea, who would it be?
Marie Antoinette.
Ah.
Now, that might seem a little bizarre, but she loved art, and she loved beauty, and she loved passion, and she loved cake, and I love cake. She was a rule breaker. She was a rebel. She was a maverick. She didn't care what the male establishment thought of her. She didn't care what society thought of her. She believed she had an opinion, she had a viewpoint, and she went for it. And that, to me, the level of that audacity, I think there can be a great reverence and a great spirituality in being audacious. Why do we need to be polite and in order to be spiritual? Can we be audacious and be spiritual? Oh yeah, I think so.
I do too.
So I think that's who I would love to sit down and go, Marie, what drove you to that? And she would probably say, I was following my passion and I was following my heart, and it didn't make sense to anybody else. In fact, they killed me for it, but it made sense to me at the time.
Oh, so my God. I love that so much.
I would go for.
And the second question is, where would you most like to travel?
I would want to go back to Africa.
Oh, you're speaking my language again.
Yeah, Africa. The first time I landed in Africa, I knew I was home.
Yes.
Yeah. As a wildlife artist, I paint stars and galaxies and nebulas now, but my career since I was a young child, I always painted Africa. And I would go back to Africa. And
do you have a favorite part?
Tanzania. Tanzania, the Ngorongoro crater, seeing the migration of those millions and millions of animals as they cross the Serengeti it's like and as I compare the two to painting stars now, as I paint galaxies, it's like that. It's seeing such life. You see life in such a way. I mean, I'm going to get emotional talking about it. It's so poignant and raw and alive. It's, and you watch the animals cross the horizon of the Serengeti, and then you see a group of lionesses come out of nowhere, and they grab a little wildebeest calf, and the first thing you want to do is go save that little calf. It's like, no, kitties, don't do it. But in that moment of life, it grabs you by the heart and it squeezes you in such a way that when you come back to the regular world, it feels sort of artificial. And I would love to be able to live with that degree of reverence for life in its authentic nature in that way. There's no sympathy there when that little wildebeest gets taken by the pride. Mm-hmm. It's life, and life, it is there. It is. Life is, and all the death and the birth and that's what Africa brings to me. If I could live there, if I could be, Meryl Streep in Out of Africa at that era, and if Robert Redford would wash my hair at the river.
I love it. Oh, so my love, how do we reach out and connect with you? How do we deepen in with you?
Well, you can come and hang out at my website at www.simonewright.com. There is always something interesting and fun going on there. I'm inviting more and more people to come and join me in Modern Mystics membership, which is a place where we do esoteric study and metaphysical study, and we learn real deep, powerful, practical spiritual principles. We break the fluff of the law of attraction. We go into working magic. We go into creating sacred space. We work with intuition. It's a real cool, fun place for you to start to learn authentic, esoteric, metaphysical, magical tools. And you can either dip your toe in or dive full in with that. And that's where I invite people to sort of get started with me. And there's coaching and classes and all sorts of, and there's a blog and everything on there too you can check out.
And we will put all that information on the show notes at honorthefeminine.com, so people have really easy ways to deepen in with Simone.
Yeah.
Simone, my love, thank you for today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It goes by so fast with you, Shannon.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yes. It's like Albert Einstein said, if you're sitting on a stove, it's going to go really slow. But if you hang out with a beautiful girl, it goes really fast. So you've made it go by really, really fast.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello again, everyone. I love being with Simone. I love the way she speaks about intuition. I love being with her because she's so real and she always makes me laugh. I love spending time with her because we go deep and really talk about how intuition works and the ideas around that intuition will shatter your comfort zone. That it doesn't always mean ease following your intuition. And she blows my mind and I just love her. So I hope you also enjoyed Simone today. And if you would like to connect more deeply with Simone, you can go over to the show notes for this episode at honorthefeminine.com. We have a lot going on over here at Honor the Feminine. We have just launched our new look. I'm loving it. I'd done the logo for the original podcast about, it's probably been a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. And what we put out today just really feels so much more me in the way I have grown and evolved. So I'd love to hear how it resonates with you. I'm also working with Ava Aldinolfi on Remembering Divine Union. And we are going to be launching at the end of the year an 8-month journey with us around the intertwining between the sacred masculine and the divine feminine within each of us. And it is going to be such a beautiful journey. I've just loved to watch it unfold. And so we're going to be sharing more and more information around that. You can also join us in our sacred space on Facebook over at Honor the Feminine Daily. And there we talk about how we each honor the feminine every day. And I'm live in that group a lot to talk about what's going on. And I invite you to go live and be seen in that group. It's this beautiful group of women that is just so fun to be with them. And finally, if you loved today, subscribe to the podcast. We have some amazing episodes coming up, and please share this episode with a friend. It's how I get, the recommendations from my sisters is how I get turned on to all the new podcasts in my life. All right, everyone, have a magical day.